Undeclared wars are commonplace. Tragically, our government engages in preemptive war, otherwise known as aggression, with no complaints from the American people. Sadly, we have become accustomed to living with the illegitimate use of force by government. To develop a truly free society, the issue of initiating force must be understood and rejected.
What if sometimes, to love your country, you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, March 10th, 2026. Professor John Mearsheimer will be with us in just a moment on evaluating the human cost of war. But first this.
Don't you just cringe when people say, "I told you so"? Sorry, I told you gold and silver would reap the benefits due to excessive money printing, inflation, and global uncertainty. It's here. It's happened. Gold and silver have reached all-time highs. Did you call Lear Capital and buy some? It's not too late. Experts are predicting higher prices ahead. Why? Nothing has changed. Geopolitical chaos, cost of living crises, and a weaker dollar are driving central banks to boost their gold reserves. Forecasts suggest gold could hit $6,000 an ounce and silver $200 an ounce. Even Morgan Stanley ditched the 60-40 rule for 60-20-20, putting 20% into precious metals. They're getting educated, and you should too. Call the best in the business and the people I trust. Lear Capital. Get their reports, get the facts, get some gold and silver. Tell them the judge sent you and get up to $20,000 in bonus gold or silver. Call 800-511-4620 or go to LearJudgeNap.com.
Professor John Mearsheimer, welcome here, my dear friend. As always, thank you for accommodating my schedule. Before we get into the human cost of war, about which you spoke very eloquently in another forum recently, President Trump claims that the U.S. has won the war in Iran. Now, without his having articulated a clear goal from the outset, it's hard to comprehend exactly what he means. But from your observations, by any measurement, can the United States claim it has won this war after 10 days of mayhem?
No. You want to remember that the principal goal here was regime change, and that was all designed for the purpose of eliminating the ballistic missile threat, eliminating Iran's nuclear enrichment capability, and getting Iran to stop supporting the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas. They haven't gotten rid of the regime. The regime is alive and well. The people are rallying around the flag, and as far as ballistic missiles are concerned, we can see with our own eyes that ballistic missiles are continuing to fly into Gulf states and into Israel. In terms of their nuclear capability, if anything, this has increased the chances that Iran is going to get nuclear weapons. And in fact, in terms of Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, Iran is working with Hezbollah today as we speak, and they're working with the Houthis. So we have achieved none of the objectives that President Trump set out at the start of this campaign, and therefore it's impossible to declare victory.
How, well, from dumb to catastrophic, however you want to characterize it, was the decision to murder the Ayatollah?
It was a remarkably foolish decision. I mean, the administration, and this is true of the Israelis, have this deep-seated belief that decapitation produces instant victory. The historical record is unequivocally clear that it never works. Furthermore, if you go back to the June 2025 war, the 12-day war, the Israelis decapitated the regime at the start of that war, and it didn't work then, and it didn't work this time ever. So I don't understand why they thought they could win this war quickly with a decapitation strategy. But having failed, they're now in a war of attrition against an adversary, the Iranians, who have a huge number of ballistic missiles, a huge number of drones, and who are operating in what I would call as a target-rich environment. They're just lots of big fat targets that they can hit with those ballistic missiles. And we do not have much capability to defend our bases, to defend our allies in the Gulf, or even to defend Israel. You want to remember that the 12-day war back in June of last year ended because the Israelis had run out of defensive missiles, and we were burning through our defensive missiles at a frightening pace. Well, today's the 12th day of this war. So we're basically where we were last June. And one would expect, and one sees lots of evidence of it, that the Israelis and the Americans and our allies in the Gulf states are running out of defensive missiles.
How badly has Israel been damaged, both physically by bombs and politically by Netanyahu exposing the public to needlessly to the wrath of the Iranian military?
Well, it's very hard to say because the Israeli censorship has been almost airtight. It's quite remarkable how few reports we've been getting out of Israel on what kind of damage is being inflicted by the Iranians on the Israeli homeland. The other thing is that the Iranians have made it clear that in these first 12 days of the war, they have concentrated mainly on American targets and on targets in the Gulf states. This is not to say they haven't attacked Israel, but you remember in the 12-day war, they didn't attack the Gulf states and they didn't attack American bases. They focused laser-like on attacking Israel. But this time they have three sets of targets, as I said, the Gulf state targets, the American targets, and the Israeli targets. And there is some evidence, take this with a grain of salt, that the Iranians are now shifting most of their attacks to going after Israel. And Israel, of course, is running out of defensive launchers and therefore is in a precarious position and is likely over the next couple weeks to get pummeled much more than it has been in these first 12 days of this conflict.
Do you think President Trump called President Putin yesterday? We don't know exactly what they discussed. The Russians said it was serious and constructive and candid. President Trump said President Putin praised the American military. It's hard for me to believe that, but that's what he said. Do you think he's looking for some sort of an off-ramp here, that he recognizes that this war can't go on much longer?
I think there's no question that he's looking for an off-ramp. I would assume that that's why he called Putin, because Putin is in a good position, if anyone is, to sort of negotiate an end to this conflict. But if you think about Trump's situation, he has not won a victory here. He can say he's won a victory, but you cannot tell a plausible story about how we have won this war so far. Furthermore, if you think about continuing the fight, what we have to do is go up the escalation ladder to win the fight. But if you go up the escalation ladder, in my opinion, you're not going to win the fight. You're going to make a bad situation worse. So this makes no sense. And he is flirting with a situation where the international economy could end up being maybe even catastrophically damaged, or at least badly damaged. We haven't felt the full effects of the 12 days of war on the international economy yet, but that's going to hit in the next week or so. And furthermore, more damage is going to be done to that economy in the weeks ahead, which is just going to make a bad situation worse. So Trump and his advisors surely understand that this has not worked out the way Prime Minister Netanyahu told him it was going to work out, and they better figure a way out. They better find an off-ramp. But if you can find the off-ramp, please let me know, because I don't see what the off-ramp is.
Right. this horrible, horrible state of affairs with the girls' school. Scott Ritter has told us that he's studied the videos, and 5 missiles hit the school and the buildings around it. The 5th of which was the second missile to hit the school. It was a missile that, when it strikes, its unused fuel is triggered to ignite, to cause tremendous fire. And the girls were incinerated. Trump said, well, I'll let you hear what he said. Cut number 10.
Mr. President, did the United States bomb a girls' elementary school in southern Iran on the first day of the war and kill 175 people?
In my opinion, based on what I've seen, that was done by Iran.
Is that true, Mr. Higson? It was Iran who did that?
We're certainly investigating.
Still investigating?
But the only side that targets civilians is Iran. We think it was done. We think it was done by Iran.
Can you give us an
because
idea?
They're very inaccurate, as you know, with their munitions. They have no accuracy whatsoever. It was done by Iran.
He was pressed by 2 reporters, the second of which is a New York Times reporter who's being lauded by his fellow journalists this morning. We'll play both for you, Chris. 18 and 19 back to back.
Tomahawk missile likely destroyed that Iranian girls' school. So will the U.S. accept any responsibility?
Well, I
for
haven't
that strike?
seen it, and I will say that the Tomahawk, which is one of the most powerful weapons around, is used by, is sold and used by other countries, you know that. And whether it's Iran, who also has some Tomahawks, I wish they had more, but whether it's Iran or somebody else, the fact that a Tomahawk is very generic, it's sold to other countries, but that's being investigated right now.
You just suggested that Iran somehow got its hands on a Tomahawk and bombed its own elementary school on the first day of the war. But you're the only person in your government saying this. Even your defense secretary wouldn't say that when he was asked, standing over your shoulder on your plane on Saturday. Why are you the only person saying this?
Because I just don't know enough about it. I think it's something that I was told is under investigation, but Tomahawks are used by others, as you know. Numerous other nations have Tomahawks. They buy them from us. But I will certainly, whatever the report shows, I'm willing to live with that report.
This is madness born of ignorance to suggest that the Iranians would have slaughtered 170 of their own schoolgirls.
First of all, it's ludicrous to say that Iran has Tomahawk missiles. I mean, who would make that argument? And you want to remember, in the first clip that you played, he said that Iran has no missiles that have any accuracy whatsoever. That contradicts the argument that they have Tomahawks, which are highly accurate weapons. But furthermore, again, the idea that they have Tomahawks is crazy. The idea that they purposely targeted this girls' school with a Tomahawk missile, I mean, who seriously believes that? I think it's very clear what happened here, by the way. I think the Americans did hit that school with a Tomahawk missile, and they thought it was a military target. It appears quite clearly that girls' school was once part of the naval base right next door that we were targeting. And they went after that school with the Tomahawks, thinking that they were going after a naval base. I don't believe that the United States purposely targeted the girls' school so that they could kill 170 plus little girls. I just don't believe that. This was a tragic mistake. And Trump should admit that and take the issue off the table. Say it was a tragic mistake. It's not the way the United States is supposed to wage war. And in this case, it's not the way we are waging war. But of course, instead of doing that, he engages in all these lies and distortions and keeps the issue alive and makes us look hypocritical. And also it makes us look like we don't really care. We don't have any sense of decency left.
You recently spoke, I'm not sure when and where, but we're going to play the clip in which you articulated your concern, dismay, misunderstanding, condemnation, if you will. Don't let me put a word in your mouth, at the loss of life visited by the United States in the Middle East and elsewhere from sanctions and from wars. We're going to play a little bit of that clip, and then I'll ask you to elaborate.
You know, I was looking at a study the other day put out by Lancet, which is a scientific journal, and it asked what were the consequences of those sanctions. And we murdered 38 million people. 38 million people. The amount of havoc we have wrought on the Middle East in recent years is just stunning. If you think about the consequences of the Iraq War, what we do in places like Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, you understand we're using this tremendous economic leverage we have to basically starve people, to make them suffer, to inflict great punishment on them so that they'll rise up against their government. You understand that this is what we're doing in Venezuela. This is what we're doing in Iran. We're inflicting massive punishment on these people. Given all that, I find it very difficult to talk about the United States as a noble country.
What statistics was had the Lancet gathered, and how did the United States kill 38 million people?
Yeah, the Lancet study, which is readily available on the internet, was done, I think, late last summer. This is 2025, and Lancet, of course, is a highly respected scientific journal.
Right.
And what Lancet did is, or the investigators did, is that they looked at the effect of U.S. sanctions on different countries around the world between 1971 and 2021. So 1971 to 2021. And of course, we were sanctioning lots of countries because that is our modus operandi. And the study concludes that during that period, we basically murdered 38 million people. 38 million people. This is truly stunning. And this doesn't include, as I said in the clip that you just played, all the people that we killed, not with sanctions, but in other ways in the Iraq War. And don't forget, I mean, and this is of enormous importance, that we are part of a tag team, and the other member of that tag team is the Israelis. When you talk about murder and mayhem in the Middle East, I mean, they're probably even better at creating it than we are. And we've talked about the genocide on many occasions on this show. And although it's the Israelis who are executing the genocide in Gaza, we are fully complicit in that genocide. And that includes not just President Trump, but President Biden as well. So the crime of all crimes, genocide, is one that we have participated in addition to all those people that we've murdered with sanctions in our various wars in the Middle East.
Well, here's the Iranian Foreign Minister, Professor Mearsheimer, on Sunday. The very interesting observations that he made. It's not very long. Chris, number 17.
Well, they have to explain why they started this aggression before we come to the point to even consider a ceasefire. Of course, nobody wants to continue this war. This is not our war. This is not the war of our choice. This is imposed on us by the United States, by Israelis. They have, started this war unprovoked, unwarranted, illegally. And what we are doing is legal act of self-defense, and we have every right to do that. So it is not fair that if only it stops the aggression and ask us to stop too. As I said, this time is different.
Implication is that he received some communication, probably from an intermediary, that the United States wanted to consider a ceasefire. They're not going to receive such a consideration amicably, are they?
Let me make 2 points. You want to remember that when the 12-day war ended last June, a lot of people, me included, thought it was foolish of the Iranians, from their perspective, to agree to a ceasefire. They were pretty much in the driver's seat. It was the Israelis and the Americans who wanted to end the 12-day war. And the Iranians went along. But one could make a powerful argument that they should have continued the war. And I think that logic is kicked in here. Now, the second point, and maybe even more important point, is that if Iran is going to agree to put an end to the war, they have to get some benefits, some positive. There has to be some positive benefits for them for ending the war. And what they're going to want is at least significant sanctions relief. But they're also probably going to call for reparations, given all the destruction that's been wrought on their country. And the question you have to ask yourself is, can you imagine the United States agreeing to lift a substantial number of the sanctions that are already on Iran for purposes of ending this war? Can you imagine the Americans paying reparations? I find it hard to imagine us doing that. But if we don't do that, tell me how the war ends. Why would the Iranians quit if they don't get any sanctions relief, if they don't get any benefits for having waged this war? To just agree to a ceasefire from their point of view doesn't make sense, because you'll pretty soon be back to the situation that existed before February 28th, and they'll just be preparing for another war. So once they're in this war, and once they've paid the price they have paid so far, they have a deep-seated interest in continuing the war and trying to inflict massive punishment on us and getting us to scream uncle before they scream uncle. So I think if you listen to what the foreign minister, the Iranian foreign minister, was saying, and you extrapolate from that, you see just how difficult it's going to be for President Trump to bring this war to an end, which he clearly has an incentive to do at this point.
Here's a montage of the president's supporters. You'll recognize some of the names and faces. They apparently got the talking points because they all use the same one, cut number 2.
This is a short-term disruption for the long-term gain.
Short-term pain for the long-term gain.
Short-term pain be for long-term gain.
We're going to have some short-term pain with long-term gain.
Some short-term pain, yes, but we've got some long-term gain.
Some short-term pain for American consumers.
We may have to deal with that in the short term.
Short-term and temporary.
Temporary short-term pain.
It's going to suck in the short term.
Some short-term pain.
Short-term pain. We have to focus on the short-term.
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 Short-term. Short-term and long-term.
Short-term blip.
Hopefully this is a short-term pain. Short-term is highly outweighed of the long-term benefits.
Some short-term pain for the long-term gain.
Well, I wonder if Prime Minister Netanyahu will call up Washington and say, uncle.
It's possible, but I just want to say that when you engage in a war, it's very important to understand that there are two sides, and that one side doesn't set the terms of the war, and that's the end of the story. I know the Secretary of Defense has made exactly that point in those words. And of course, you hear all these people talking as if we will determine by ourselves whether it's a short war or a long war. And of course, they're basically arguing we are going to win a war quickly. And then that's the end of it. So pain in the short term, but not in the long term, gain in the long term. But the problem with that logic is it forgets that the Iranians have a voice, and the Iranians have a deep-seated interest in turning this war into a long war. When you listen to these people talk about how desirable a short war is, you know they're saying, in effect, we don't want a long war. The Iranians fully understand that, and that's why they want a long war, because they understand they can inflict great pain in the long term. So I think that it will be the Americans and the Israelis who put an end to this war, not the Iranians, because the Iranians have a deep-seated interest in just fighting on.
What will be the effects of this war on BRICS?
Well, first of all, there's been an important split in BRICS up to this point. The 4 major states in BRICS are, of course, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. That's where you get the acronym BRIC. And Brazil, Russia, and China have vehemently protested or criticized the American-Israeli war against Iran and the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei as well. But the Indians have not. So there is, at this point in time, an important fault line inside of BRICS on this war. What is the long-term effect? Look, the long-term effect of this is that more and more countries around the world are going to have less and less interest in having a close relationship, certainly a close strategic relationship, but even a close economic relationship with the United States. The United States is a rogue elephant. We could talk about the Indian case. The Indians, if they're smart, will do everything they can to put as much distance between themselves and the United States as possible. Now, there's no question that they have strategic interests that overlap, and those strategic interests involve China. But putting that aside, you don't want to get too close to the United States, because the United States will end up putting wicked tariffs on you or doing something else that's designed to hurt your economy or hurt you strategically. Look at these states in the Gulf region, and given what's happened here, the United States and Israel dragged these Gulf states into a war that could have catastrophic consequences. I mean, if this war escalates and the Iranians really go after those Gulf states, they go after the desalination plants and they go after oil infrastructure in those Gulf states, they could almost literally destroy countries like the UAE. So they are in a terrible situation. And I would say that they have figured out that this is the price you pay for getting too close to Uncle Sam. And they're not the only countries in the world that understand this. All of this, to answer your question, is a way of saying that BRICS overall will benefit from this fiasco.
Oh, but sometimes the United States will give permission to a member of BRICS to buy oil from Russia. Watch Secretary Bessent.
The Indians had been very good actors. We had asked them to stop buying sanctioned Russian oil this fall. They did. They were going to substitute it with U.S. oil. But to ease the temporary gap of oil around the world, we have given them permission to accept the Russian oil. We may unsanction other Russian oil. You know, the other thing Treasury can do here, Larry, is there are hundreds of millions of barrels of sanctioned crude on the water, and in essence, by unsanctioning them, Treasury can create supply.
I didn't know the Indians needed the permission of the U.S. Treasury to buy oil from Russia.
I was on Indian TV yesterday talking about this very issue. Very important to understand that the Indians are an especially proud people. And the idea that they need America's permission to buy oil from the Russians just enrages them. And they're already mad at President Trump because last year, when there was a flare-up between Pakistan and India, and the Indians and the Pakistanis settled that conflict largely between themselves, President Trump came along and said that he was responsible for ending that conflict. That enraged the Indians. The clip that you just played enraged the Indians. And it's just all evidence of just how much damage we're doing in our relationships with countries all over the world, with countries that we need. Now, we can get away with a lot of this because we're so powerful. It's just very important to understand that the reason that President Trump is allowed to behave the way he does and the way he gets away with so much is because the United States is remarkably powerful, and people around the world are afraid of offending the United States, which is another way of saying they're afraid of offending President Trump. So he can whiplash people as he sees fit, but there is a price to pay. And we are paying that price. And I believe with the passage of time, the price is going to increase.
Chris, can you put up the full screen from the Wall Street Journal that you and I just talked about? This is this morning's Wall Street Journal, a newspaper owned by Rupert Murdoch and largely favorable to President Trump. Trump advisors urge him to find Iran exit ramp, fearing political backlash. Does this make sense to you?
Absolutely. I mean, before the war started on February 28th, most people thought that the Republicans were going to get clobbered in the midterm elections. This is before the war. Now the war has started. And remember, this was an unpopular war. Before it started, only 20% of the people in the United States, only 40% of Republicans were in favor of the war. There was a headline, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, said that this was the first time that a president took the United States into a war where public opinion was clearly against that war. And when you marry that fact to the fact that the war is not going well, you see where this could be catastrophic for the Republican Party in the fall. And it could be catastrophic for President Trump, because if you get large majorities of Democrats in control of both the Senate and the House, impeachment will be a serious issue for sure. And this will be a huge headache for President Trump.
Yes, I think you're right, Professor Mearsheimer. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for that great clip. I had no idea that number of dead by starvation and war and the absence of medicines was 38 million. It's truly, truly, truly staggering, embarrassing, humiliating, reckless. You almost can't come up with enough negative adjectives to characterize it. But thank you, John. All the best, my dear friend.
And all the best to you, Judge.
Thank you. Coming up later today at 1 o'clock this afternoon on all of this, Aaron Mate at 2 o'clock, Matt Ho at 3 o'clock, Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.